Carmarthen. From here it looks a sleepy place on the curve of a meandering river. But for centuries, this was the biggest town in Wales. Carmarthen was a bustling centre of commerce and culture, and the lifeblood of the town was the River Towy, once packed with ships. As well as a busy trading port, Carmarthen was a holy place, a hotbed of rebellion, a town that has produced desperate criminals and outstanding sportsmen. It's also a place that has spawned mystical tales of sorcerers and magic oak trees. But the true history of Carmarthen is far more fascinating than any myth. The story of Carmarthen begins with the Romans. Around 75 AD, they took one look at this river crossing, 8 miles inland, overlooked by easily defended high ground, and said, "We'll take it." The Romans recognised Carmarthen's strategic importance. As the lowest bridging point on the River Towy, it was the gateway to West Wales. And its location at the river's tidal limit meant it could also be reached by sea. The Romans built a fort here, and later a walled town, which became a magnet for local traders and craftsmen. Along with Caerwent, this was one of just 2 towns the Romans built in Wales. They called it Moridunum. You may think the name comes from the mystical Myrddin or Merlin in English, but there's no wizardry to this. The Romans simply took the Celtic words for sea, mor, and fort, dinos, and made them, with a Latin tweak, Moridunum. Over the years, Moridunum becomes Myrddin, stick another fort, Caer, in front, mutate it a bit, Caerfyrddin. The Romans also left something else behind, something rather unexpected. It's up here, just tucked away off the road to Llandelo. An amphitheatre. Only one of 7 in Britain, which shows the importance of this place as a Roman regional centre. When it was full, this place would have rung with the cheers and roars of 4,000 to 5,000 people. Maybe it's the start of our passion for contact sport. After the Romans, the next people to stamp their mark on Carmarthen were the Normans. In 1109, Henry I of England built a castle here. There were others in the area, but they belonged to mere barons. This was a royal castle, and it was put here to show the locals who ran the show in this part of the world. Just as a community had grown up around the Roman fort, which was now known as the Old Town, so the Normans created a community here around the castle, the New Town. The new Norman town thrived economically, but the Old Town was still a rich cultural centre. Historians believe that it was in the priory there that the Black Book of Carmarthen was transcribed in the 13th century. It is now treasured as one of the earliest and most important surviving manuscripts in the Welsh language. In 1546, the 2 towns were amalgamated by royal charter. The newly united Carmarthen was booming. 500 years ago, the River Towy would have been busy with ships bringing in goods from the sea, picking up fresh cargo, connecting local farmers and tradesmen with markets in Bristol, Devon and France. By the 16th century, Carmarthen, with this thriving port, had become the biggest town in Wales. Records of what was coming in and out of the port still survive today. What have we got here?
This is a very important transcript of the Welsh port books. The Welsh port books were basically the custom returns for the whole of Wales. And what we're looking at here is the returns in the book for the period Michaelmas 1566 to Michaelmas 1567. Let's look at these 2 vessels. There's the Mary John of Carmarthen and the Nightingale of Carmarthen. They've both come from France. The Mary John has landed salt. and the Nightingale has landed Gascony, 24 tons of Gascony. So it's landed wine. That's basically wine from what we would call Bordeaux. But for the salt's going to be used in a number of trades. Obviously, for the farming community, it's important for butter. It's important for salting hams, but it's also used in the sort of woolen industry as well.
The Michael, the Matthew, the Nightingale, does that suggest it's a busy place?
Carmarthen is very, very important for the whole. It's an entrepôt, so it's important for the whole economy of the region. So right the way up 20, 30 miles away, places as far as Llandovery, if you're manufacturing wool out to there, it's going to come down to Carmarthen and be exported for Carmarthen. Very busy, bustly place.
And with bustling trade came a thirst for knowledge. In 1725, the first press in Wales moved here. Others soon followed, making Carmarthen the most bookish town in the country. Outside Lammas Street Meeting House, there's a plaque to one of the town's most prolific printers. John Ross and his collaborator Peter Williams didn't play by the book when it came to taking on the powerful academic establishments of Oxford and Cambridge. Ross and Williams wanted to publish a Welsh language Bible that everyone could afford. But there was a snag. Only Oxford and Cambridge had the authority to publish a Bible, as they held the copyright. Methodist minister Peter Williams had a cunning plan.
Peter Williams discovered a loophole. In other words, that if a Bible was published with explanatory notes, he could get away with it. The other thing was, of course, that people couldn't afford a Bible. They were too poor to afford a Bible. So what he did was to publish this in parts, 15 in all, at a shilling a throw, so that you were able, much as you have these days, you know, these publications coming out in monthly issues or whatever, and it built up into a complete copy of the Bible.
The Peter Williams Bible was such a success that 18,000 copies were printed during his lifetime, spreading the scripture through the chapels and homes of Wales, and all thanks to a few footnotes. The Welsh language has deep roots in Carmarthen, and the town has played a key part in shaping the modern Eisteddfod. The colourful pageantry of the festival could be traced back to 1819, when Iolo Morgannwg linked his society of poets, known as the Gorsedd of the Bards, with the Eisteddfod for the first time in Carmarthen. But all this ceremony and culture only tells half the story of the town. It also had a dark side. During the 18th and 19th centuries, it was notorious as one of the most corrupt and violent boroughs in Britain. The Guildhall, the scene of many clashes between the town's two political factions, the Whigs and the Tories. 1831 election year, a mob twice stormed the Guildhall, beating up clerks and threatening to kill anyone who dared to vote for the Tory candidate. Carmarthen made history that day as the only town in Wales to have a parliamentary election cancelled because of violent disorder. And there was more to come. A decade later, gangs of men dressed in women's clothing roamed Carmarthenshire, destroying the toll gates which taxed road users. These were the Rebecca riots. But toll houses like this one on the western edge of town were only the straw that broke the camel's back. The poor in the countryside were already suffering from high rents and bad harvests. Squeezed on all sides, the farmers of southwest Wales had had enough. They joined forces to fight back, rallying to a very unusual clarion call. This conch is called Cragen Beca, or Rebecca's shell. It had been hidden for generations by a local family who feared they'd be locked up or transported to Tasmania if the authorities ever discovered that it had once been blown as a call to arms during the Rebecca riots. Oh, I'm quite busy now. Come on, rioters! On the 19th of June, 1843, over 1,000 protesters marched into Carmarthen, heading for the Guildhall, where they would deliver a list of demands and grievances to the mayor and magistrates. But they never got there. A mob broke away and came straight here, Carmarthen Workhouse. Having forced the master of the workhouse to open the gates, they stormed inside.
They all came in, hundreds of them by all accounts. They began throwing beds out of the window, pushing over the furniture, trying to burn the place down. So it was a serious riot.
Why did they choose the workhouse? Why did they pick on the place that had least?
The workhouse was very unpopular. Families were divided. The mothers were taken from their children, and the husbands and wives weren't allowed to live together. And the food, apparently, in Carmarthen prison was much better than it was in the workhouse. So if you wanted a symbol of oppression and dereliction, go for the workhouse.
Those imprisoned for their part in the workhouse riot served their time in the county jail, which stood on this site, now occupied by the council headquarters. Nothing remains of the jail, but a volume known as the Felons Register can be found in the Carmarthenshire archives. John, it's a mighty tome.
It is, yes.
What do we have here?
It is the Felons Register for Carmarthen Jail from 1844 to 1870. This is the register of all the people that were incarcerated there.
John, it comes complete with photographs. Who did all this?
Well, the photographs were taken by the governor of the jail at the time, George Stevens, he was just interested in photography. They do turn out to be some of the earliest, if not the earliest, mugshots in Britain.
2 CM HL.
Yeah, 2 calendar months hard labour.
Yeah.
What was he doing? Stealing clothes. There's a chap there from France, stealing a pair of boots.
He looks very French.
He does, doesn't he? Yes, yeah.
Does that suggest that Carmarthen offered sort of rich pickings and word got out?
Well, yeah, it was a relatively cosmopolitan place at the time. There was more trade going on in here, so probably more opportunities for people to come up here and steal and rob. 2 favourites of mine, John Evans and Daniel McCarthy, right, 13 and 14, attempting to steal strawberries, 14 days hard labour, and 3 years in a reform school. They didn't even get the pleasure of eating the strawberries, they just attempted to eat them. There's one very notorious woman in Carmarthen who was named Anne Aubrey, and from her early 20s she's recorded in the census as a seamstress, which is a euphemism for prostitute. But her main crime was for permanently drunk and disorderly and violent. And she's so drunk on occasion she was actually unconscious on the streets. And in one case, the policeman arrested her by borrowing a wheelbarrow and wheeling her down King Street to the police station. The main crime, I think, in Carmarthen was drunkenness. It is now, and it was then.
In its heyday, Carmarthen proudly claimed to have more pubs per head than anywhere else in Wales. It still enjoys something of a reputation as a boozer's paradise. During one 19th century election, a prospective parliamentary candidate plied locals with 25,000 gallons of ale, 11,000 bottles of whiskey and 500 bottles of cider. They drank the lot and voted in his rival. But Carmarthen was changing. During the 19th century, the town lost something of its Wild West feel as developers embarked on a programme of civic improvement. A number of important landmarks sprang up, including Trinity College, St David's Lunatic Asylum, as it was called then, and the imposing Picton Monument put up in memory of Sir Thomas Picton, Governor of Trinidad and the most senior officer to die at Waterloo. And in 1852, the railway came to town. This spelled the beginning of the end for Carmarthen's life as a port. Steam power was driving not just trains, but an industrial revolution that would leave Carmarthen behind. By the end of the 19th century, the town that had once been the biggest in Wales was now only the 24th largest. If the people of Carmarthen were dismayed at the changing fortunes of their town, they didn't let it show. In 1900, they celebrated the dawn of a new century by building this civic park. And they fitted it out with a state-of-the-art facility for enthusiasts of a new, action-packed, high-speed sport. When this velodrome was built, the country was in the grip of cycling fever. We still are. The bicycle as we know it today, with its chain-driven gears and pneumatic tyres, was only invented in the late 19th century. By 1900, cycling enthusiasts were pushing this new creation to its limits in competitions held at Carmarthen Park, watched by hundreds of spectators. But more sombre times were to follow. Like every other town across Wales, Carmarthen suffered losses during the First and Second World Wars. A snapshot of the town during the Second World War is captured in a unique volume belonging to the family of Alec Richards. I have to say, this is one of the most interesting books I have ever seen. It's a remarkable record.
It is a remarkable book, actually.
Isn't it just?
It is.
Tell me, how did it come about?
Well, my mother, obviously during the war, she kept this diary. She started it at the beginning of the war.
Carmarthen was an important centre for the recruitment and training of troops, and Alec's family home overlooked Ystrad playing fields, where soldiers were billeted during the war. Among them were many American GIs.
We had tremendous fights. The local boys were losing all their girlfriends, you see, because the Yanks had their nice uniforms and they had plenty of money. I remember catching my sister in a homemade tent up in the woods. There was this Yank that she got friendly with. So rather upset her and him.
These sketches, done by a GI, these are extraordinary.
Whoever it was obviously became one of the family, as far as my mum was concerned, and she was artistic as well. So that's what encouraged this, I think.
April 1944, so it's 2-3 months before
D-Day.
Before D-Day, so we don't know.
Well, half these guys were probably killed, you see.
Yeah. It's a book out of which the spirit of the age comes up to you.
Truly, it does.
Now, we know Carmarthen had earned its place in the electoral history books thanks to its fondness for a good old riot, but in 1966, it rocked the political establishment once again. In March of that year, Lady Megan Lloyd-George had been elected as Labour MP for Carmarthen with 21,000 votes. Plaid Cymru candidate Gwynfor Evans had come third with just 7,000 votes. Plaid had never won a parliamentary seat. But Lady Megan's death a few weeks later prompted a by-election that would change everything. Gwynfor's son Gito was roped in to help with the campaign.
This election was a special election. We noticed that there was something happening, that people whom we knew were old liberal families were prepared to say, oh, this time we are considering voting Plaid. We knew that we were in for a good chance to become a good second. That's what we were campaigning for.
But only second?
Yes, and we thought that the Liberals were main contenders for second place. Our tactics were to ensure that the Liberals didn't have much publicity. There was a poster war going on between us, and we caught some Liberals taking down our posters in Johnstown down there. And we chased them through the town, and this was about 3-4 o'clock in the morning.
On election night, Gwynfor Evans made history when he was voted in as Plaid Cymru's first MP, with a majority of 2,500 votes.
They opened those sash windows. There isn't a door coming out to the balcony. They had to step over the windowsill to come out, and it was announced from up there. The square was full of people, and the whole place just erupted. It was like a volcano. There was a little silence, and then whoosh, everybody started jumping up and down and shouting and laughing and crying. A lot of people, my sister, she just broke down and wept, and she had to be comforted up in the corner up there by people. She just couldn't take it. It changed modern Wales. It changed the political scene altogether.
Carmarthen was punching above its weight during the 1960s and 1970s. Not only did it transform British politics, it also produced more than its fair share of sporting heroes, and they were moulded here. It's a bit overgrown now, but this is the rugby pitch of the old Queen Elizabeth Grammar School. The school produced some of the greats of Welsh rugby, including Roy Bergier, who scored the crucial try in Llanelli's legendary 1972 victory against the All Blacks.
The crossbar! Overthrown!
You did churn out player after player. What was it? The milk of the famous Carmarthenshire countryside?
Could well be. We had a mixture of boys of Glad and boys of Pavians. You know, boys from the country and boys from the town, and you had big stocky farmers, and you had the nippy, chinky backs, and who had to run away from the farmers. 10:30 on a Saturday morning. You know, people were coming down from the residential areas around, and they'd be lining the banks up the top there. You would have parents, you'd have schoolboys. It was a big occasion. It was like watching first-class rugby. You had Ray Gravel, and he was, believe it or not, scrum half, and I was in the centre then, playing on these fields, watching Gerald. When I was in sixth form, Gerald was having his trials, and then I found it very surreal that a few years later, I was joining him in the Welsh team.
Carmarthenshire has continued to produce the cream of Welsh rugby.
We've had 5 people on the last tour, and we were with the Welsh Grand Slam team. That's Steve Jones, Mike Phillips, although Mike Phillips is more down line, Whitland Grammar School, Rhys Beastland, Ken Owens, and Jonathan Davis. They're all from the Carmarthen area. You know, so yeah, we're still churning them out, but to see it today sort of overgrown and unkept, it does put a lump in my throat.
Berger's going for the line. Berger's, it is all the way.
The 70s was a magical time for Welsh rugby. But in 1978, a different kind of magic was causing concern for the people of Carmarthen. Behind me once stood the town's most mystical object, in the eyes of some, the very key to its destiny, Merlin's Oak. BBC reporter Vincent Kane visited this spot when the tree, or what was left of it, was still standing.
Known to the townspeople as Merlin's Oak. And attached to that old stump is a couplet which reads, "When Priory Oak shall tumble down, then will fall Carmarthen town."
It turns out the old oak was a tree with a long history.
Well, an oak has stood here since at least the late 1600s, although the association with Merlin or Merthin goes back possibly another 1,000 years. Unfortunately, in the Victorian age, due, so they say, to locals meeting of an evening under the oak and canoodling, as if it were, some local Puritan took it into his head to poison the tree. So within living memory, you had this old withered tree in the middle of this major junction, held up by concrete, obstructing the view. And numerous locals, myself included, had shunts on the junction.
Despite local fears that the felling of the oak would lead to the downfall of the town, in 1978, road safety came first.
It was moved and the junction changed, and where the old oak used to stand, there is now just a romantic mini roundabout.
Today, one fragment of the oak is kept in St. Peter's Hall. It's displayed in an upright position, of course, and so far so good. The town's still standing. The lush Towy Valley has long been renowned for its dairy cattle and the abundant milk they produce. For centuries, the dairy industry was one of Carmarthen's great success stories. For a town which boasted the biggest dairy cattle market in Britain and 2 creameries, milk was big business. But in 1984, local farmers were furious when the European Union imposed quotas limiting the amount of milk they could produce. They organised a protest that would bring Carmarthen to a standstill. One of them planned to make the event truly epic.
I phoned my friend George, who was a neighbour, and suggested that perhaps we could have a theme of Cleopatra, who used to bathe in milk. The news soon spread, and before long we had 11 ladies willing to jump into the tubs with us. Walk like an Egyptian. And off we went to Carmarthen. It was early May and it was a cold day, so you can imagine sitting in a bath with very little clothes on as well. But I have to say, the excitement got us through.
I ffordd fryd o gael bath anyway.
Di fel arall, mae'n chepach yn dŵr.
It was pandemonium. In the end, there was about 80 tractors, and they completely snarled up the town as they started from one end to the other. And we were lucky that another kind neighbour, Mrs. Marion Davies, went into a local pub and got us all a tot of whiskey to warm us up. Perhaps we were the first calendar girls looking back on things.
And when news broke a year later that Carmarthen District Council was building an underground control centre, which many believed would be used as a nuclear bunker reserved for public officials, the citizens of Carmarthen showed their rebel spirit once again.
About 40 anti-nuclear protesters moved onto the site early this morning, settling in for what they say they're prepared to make a long stay.
To build a bunker would be a provocative act.
That was Rod Stallard 25 years ago. He was one of those who occupied the site for 5 weeks.
They put a security fence, but there were some of us who could climb the security fences quite easily. They had dogs there. I was attacked by a dog one day. I remember one morning it was dark and I had a pair of overalls on and a flat cap, and I just walked through the gate complaining that my employers had got me out of bed early.
The protest grew increasingly bitter, but opponents of the so-called bunker were vindicated when the local government ombudsman found the council had failed to follow its own planning procedures in building it. Carmarthen had witnessed some truly historic events, but in 1997 it still had one surprise up its sleeve. On the day of the referendum to determine whether Wales should have its own assembly, it was touch and go for the Yes camp, right up to the final announcement in Carmarthen Guildhall.
Dithig, Quech, Meal,
26,000. So I think that's a yes all round.
It was the moment which clinched the night for the Yes campaign, and which will ensure yet another place in the political history books for Carmarthen.
The times were changing and Carmarthen was changing with them. For centuries, farmers had descended on Carmarthen on market day to buy and sell livestock, visit the shops, catch up with old friends. But market day traffic had made the town's notorious congestion problems even worse. Carmarthen's position as the lowest bridging point on the Towy meant the town was a bottleneck, particularly in summer.
If you've ever motored down to South Wales on your holiday, you'll know all about Carmarthen, because almost inevitably you've spent some time here stuck in a traffic jam. Really, for most motorists, the main concern is getting out of Carmarthen rather than hanging around.
But people did want to hang around, and in November 2000, to ease congestion, the mart was moved out of town. Many fear that the move has taken the heart out of Carmarthen. Some of those keen to restore the town's vitality are pinning their hopes on Carmarthen's most mystical son.
There are moves afoot now in Carmarthen to take more advantage of the Merlin brand, to hold a pageant here, celebrating the legend of Merlin, and to indeed possibly to have a massive look-alike event with perhaps thousands of people dressed up as Merlin walking through this town.
Only time will tell whether Carmarthen can ever conjure up 1,000 Merlins. The old wizard may be more myth than man, but Carmarthen's historical legacy is very real. The town the Romans built here 2,000 years ago became the economic, administrative and cultural capital of southwest Wales, and 2 millennia later that remains the case. But more than that, Carmarthen is a town with a fierce independent spirit and a magic all of its own.
And Eddie's back in another Welsh town, Merthyr Tydfil, at the same time next week on BBC One Wales.